Humanity. Keep watching.
Hi, I am Dustin Pickering from Parrot Literary Corner. You know me, your noble and honest host, and I've got exciting news for you. Last anthology, Series 1, The Literary Parrot, did such a great job. We want to continue to provide this community service to our viewers and to our contributors to the program. So please get up and get a copy immediately. You know, if you're in this book, you want to get a copy. If you're not in the book, you want to get a copy and see what we're doing. You want to be excited with us. We want you on this program, and we hope to see you sometime soon on The Literary Parrot. You have to get your hands on this copy. It's amazing. It's an absolutely beautiful anthology meant just for you. Our past guests have been invited back to contribute yet again to this Series 2. We do this quarterly anthology. We will be doing this after our 200 episode milestone. As of this last quarter, we reached 200 episodes, and past that, get up and get a copy immediately. This is the only TV show on earth for creative writers, and our guests are amazing. They're also community activists building from the ground up. This program is for everybody out there who is a creative mind. Order several copies if you can and donate to local libraries. Give them to your friends, cousins, fans, supporters, anybody that you think loves poetry. And it's not just poetry in this book. Remember, this is creative mind. So we have prose, fiction, short stories, essays, artwork, anything you can think of, artistically creative, photographs. Everything in this book is packed. It is packed. It is just absolutely packed. If you want to get your hands on it now,
Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hi, welcome to Parrot TV's The Foreign Policy Review. I am Dustin Pickering, your host, and we have Carlo Parcelli, co-host with us today, and we have special guest Billy Bob, who we will have introduce himself. He is a layman political analyst, and he has written a few articles on a blog. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Billy Bob, and then we'll get into definitions that we will be using, words we will be using during the program, political terms like communism, socialism, and capitalism. So let's start off with introducing yourself a little bit and tell us what you want us to know.
Well, I'm very happy to be here. I was very happy to be invited here. I've been thinking about for a while trying to jump formats and instead of just writing to engaging in the video format. So I was very happy Carlo invited me on. You know, I'm a working class person. I'm not an academic. I care about, political issues. I care about social issues. And, I use the formats available to me like Facebook and Twitter to share my perspective. And so I just appreciate, this opportunity to share my perspective in the video here, in the video format. And we can get more into that in a little while, I guess. I'm about 46 years old. I got a wife, 2 kids. I've got a full-time job, quite busy. But I really enjoy analyzing the political situations, writing about it, sharing my thoughts, etc. So that's really what I want people to know about me. And other than, what my actual perspectives and thoughts are and things like that.
So how would you describe your perspective if you had to give it an umbrella term of sorts?
I'm relatively new. I wasn't brought up being political. So it's become apparent to me that there's different many strains of thought within leftism and even within communism, socialism. So at the moment, I kind of identify as a Marxist, Leninist, communist. That seems to be, aligning the most with my perspective. So when you say ML, Marxist, Leninist, tanky, a lot of people know exactly what that means. They have their preconceived understanding of what that means. And So I'm a little apprehensive to say that because I know there's a preconceived idea about what that means. But
Right.
yeah, Marxist-Leninism is basically a term I can embrace.
Okay. So how would you define that as opposed to, say, just Marxism, or what is it a bridge between thought, or is it a method or a tool, or how would you describe it, so people can kind of understand? Maybe there's some people out there also listening in that don't know exactly what that means, but I'm sure most people do, but there may be a few out there that don't know. So how would you define it personally?
Yeah, classical Marxism is a little bit different than Marxist-Leninism. So, Lenin kind of put Marx into practice, and in doing that, you realize that you got to do certain things when you start to actually put things in practice. And so it differs a little bit from classical Marxism. Trying to implement Marx's ideas. When you have so many obstacles, and such a powerful ideology against you and trying to subvert you, it's a struggle. But so Marxist-Leninism distinguishes itself from classical Marxism in that it embraces the Soviet Union. It embraces most Marxist-Leninists embrace modern China, and see that as a country that ought to be supported, and is engaged in doing the right thing for their people.
Okay, so let's talk to Carlo a bit. How would you define the differences between socialism and communism as opposed to the capitalist variety of economy? Carlo.
How would I make the distinction? Well, you have probably better examples of what most people would consider socialism in a lot of the Western European countries now, where social programs are in place for the population, whereas they're run essentially by the government, as opposed to the United States, where you have to go through the middleman for everything from mercenaries to healthcare. As far as Marxism goes, or communism, if you want to use that term, I think people see that as I don't think communism exists anywhere in the world in any pure sense, but the way it's seen by the general public is like a state monopoly on production. And if you take Lenin, he used the term, what was it, the term he used, state capitalism, when he began, because as Billy Bob pointed out, he had a lot of adversary, a lot of pushback when he came on board. I mean, at first there was some funds coming, especially from the West, especially around the 1922 famine, that right after World War I. But very rapidly the lines were drawn, and the West disagreed with his approach, and it's been a hardline situation ever since. I'm not like I was saying it, and only half jokingly while we were kibitzing before the show, is it anybody that can feed its people is sort of like okay in my book. Now I want to make a caveat with the United States, because yes, a lot of people were fed in the United States, but it was a militarized imperialism that allowed that kind of flourishing. And the difference with China is it's not going there. I didn't want to go down this road in this conversation this early, but it's really the distinction between China and the United States is China understands the belly, which is what I understand, and the U.S. understands the gun, and that's a fundamental distinction um, between the two approaches to feeding the belly. Um, if you have Nicaragua now, which is totally food sufficient on its own, because it realizes that the United States at any time will send a warship out and they'll block a shipment of avocados or whatever or corn or whatever. It won't arrive. So and of course other countries like Russia has now become the world's largest exporter of food, which can only happen if you don't want revolution. Another revolution is if you're also feeding your people. So I think I'm going down a garden path here in a second, just babbling, but I think the difference is that there seems to be, I don't want to use the word altruism, but there seems to be, especially with the Chinese, a caring about the welfare of the general population. And I think another example of that are the new regulations that China is now, or the old regulations they're now enforcing about people who, about the wealthy, about the wealth gap in China, and they're trying to address that. And of course, here the way that the wealth gap in the Wall Street caused collapse of 2008 was to give more billions and billions of dollars to the people that caused the wealth gap, that caused the collapse of the world economy, and enhance the wealth gap. So there's some really stark differences between the U.S. approach and the Chinese approach. But I don't think I can really speak intelligently about the difference between the socialist approach or the communist approach.
Right.
Certainly the capitalist approach I know everything about because I've been a victim of it now for 73 years.
So Billy Bob, maybe you can elaborate a little bit your perspective and the differences between socialism and communism, or you can also maybe tell us a little bit about, to kind of bridge what Carlo was saying about China and the U.S. Maybe there are differences between the Western social democrat societies and the Chinese model that we see now today in the contemporary world.
Yeah, a lot of leftists, the self-identified leftists are definitely anti-China. And the reason they are is because, we talk about modes of production. Marx talked about modes of production. So there's the private ownership of the means of production, which is capitalism, and then socialism can be defined as, the tip of the means of production. So when you look at China, obviously they're mixed. They have private production, they have publicly owned industries, their steel industry, the rail industry. Their biggest industries are publicly owned or owned by the government, but there is a lot of privately owned industries. So that, in certain, people's understandings is enough to say they're not socialists, they're not communists, they're capitalists, and I oppose them because they're just like the U.S. So that's kind of the approach that I encounter quite often, in Facebook and Twitter. And I think that's misguided for a number of reasons. So it depends on how far we want to, go to the beginning of things. But we can start with the beginning of China. So, Mao overthrew, there was a civil war in China. The communists won in 1949. Mao came to power. And immediately he was, China was, there was an embargo against China by the West, and then they traded with the Soviets. But then after Stalin died, Khrushchev, his revisionism upset Mao, and there was a big split between, the Soviets and China. So that was the Sino-Soviet split. So then they were cut off from, even trading with the Soviets. So they were pretty isolated. So they engaged in an economy of self-sufficiency. And that was basically one could say more socialist, more pure socialist. There wasn't any privately owned industry. So the thing.
I believe we lost Billy Bob just a little bit there. Maybe network problems. Okay, go ahead. I think we got you back.
So what we had, at the beginning under Mao during the Sino-Soviet split and the Western embargo was the egalitarian distribution of scarcity. So not very much, but it was evenly distributed.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a better way, a way that would be much better for the Chinese people. And so even before 1949, Mao had said, China needs to embrace capitalism. We need to embrace foreign markets. We need to embrace foreign investment, direct capital investment in our country, because that's how we're going to grow. That's how we're going to, help the people. But it wasn't an option. It wasn't an option until 1971. So before 1971, the embargo against the West was there. The Soviet split was there. And then Mao, through Mao's diplomacy and Zhou Enlai, he also, went to the U.S. several times. Nixon and Kissinger came to China in 71 and agreed to end the embargo, which opened up, a new opportunity for China. So, so in effect, the communists, they expropriated the entirety of the capitalist class political power. And for a time, they also expropriated their economic power. But they understood that if China was going to develop, if they were going to develop the productive forces to the maximum possible extent, they need to harness Western markets and direct Western foreign investment. So that became an option in 71. There's a widely held view that what Deng did after he came to power was exactly the opposite of what Mao did. And Mao was the socialist, and Deng was the capitalist that totally destroyed socialism in China. So I don't think that's an accurate view. I think Deng just basically implemented the opportunities that Mao worked to create. Basically.
Okay.
And so. We if you just look at any kind of economic development, it kind of started off slowly from, the mid to late 70s through the 80s and even through the 90s. But like after 2000, I mean, it's a rocket ship. And there's no way, if it could have happened like that. Like China would not be the, impossible to overstate success story that it is if so-called socialists had their way, or communists had their way, and they didn't embrace the harness the capitalist mode of production, and and make a split with in the economy of self-sufficiency. So that's a little bit of what I often argue with people online. That I think Carlo was in one of those conversations, but I mean, there's a lot more to it, but that's maybe you guys can give me your feedback on that.
Okay, so Carlo, I'm curious, when you mentioned earlier some regulations that were being enforced now, and how does that relate to this conversation? Like, do you have under a communist regime, do you have like like in capitalism, we have, strict regulations and policies in place to kind of guide or, with sort of restrain the private markets and under, communist China, if we're going to call it communist China, is that the case also? And how is the difference? Where does it come from?
Well, the immediate situation is, first of all, the Chinese government has initiated or has begun to enforce a number of regulations on the wealthy and on private enterprise. They even have they're going after celebrities, Chinese celebrities, for not paying their taxes and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But they're also
and the
they're also clamping down on real estate companies that aren't abiding by the regulations already in place, and they're adding new regulations on a number. One I know a little bit about is the thousands of people in China from all over the Western world who teach English to Chinese students.
Mm-hmm.
They've eliminated a lot of, or closed down a lot of those companies that are based in the West and that are not based in China, that are essentially foreign-based capitalist countries. So they've begun to do this because the wealth gap has gotten larger. Now, they're quick to point out, and it's true, that the wealth gap has gotten larger, but everyone's boat is floating higher, but the gap between the lowest boats and the highest boats is getting wider. So that's what they're talking about, the real estate. And then there's this real estate problem with Evergrande, which is one of the major real estate companies in China, and they have a $300 billion debt. And obviously the Chinese government doesn't like to see that, because more than likely they're going to have to kind of take a position of eating it or paying it off, or I really don't know how they're going to handle it. But for me it doesn't bode well, because China's been very ambitious with its Belton Road project,
Mm-hmm.
and it's to keep doing that. Now, I don't want to get too far afield here, because I could probably talk for the next 50 minutes about it. But to try to be brief, with the Belton Road project, you have all of these efforts being made to raise the standards all around the world, and they have building projects everywhere in Africa, South America. Like we were just talking about Nicaragua. Nicaragua has just re-recognized China after the Chamorro government recognized Taiwan and brought a bunch of Taiwanese workers over here. That when the Sandinistas again took power, they were afraid to begin to recognize China again, because several thousand Nicaraguans work for these Taiwanese companies. But after this last election, when Blinken and those idiots and Biden just out of the blew it out their asses about the elections not being free and fair, it just became obvious to the Sandinistas that nothing was going to appease Washington. So they went back to China. They recognized China, and then the day after that, they re-signed the agreement to build a canal through Nicaragua. This comes after the UN had a vote where I don't know what it was, but I only think it was only the United States and one other country that voted not to recognize the Sandinistas. It's just like the Cuban government every year. Hundreds of governments recognize that the embargo should be lifted from the Cuban government, and the U.S. doesn't do it. So it doesn't show any goodwill. Venezuela, Guaido is another example. This fool never got a vote for a presidential election. So why wouldn't you turn to China? Here's a country that's offering these deals. Now, people want to go, look, China is they're no better than the United States. They're just doing this for their own self-aggrandizement. Well, maybe that's so. Maybe it's going to help their development too, if they can, improve trade routes, improve high-speed rails, build hospitals and schools in some of these other countries, so that they can be prosperous too, like China's prosperous. That seems to be the Chinese idea, at least publicly. That seems to be the Chinese idea. But the distinction's easy to make, because I just go, how many people have the Chinese killed in their Belt and Road project? I could probably count them on these two hands. and there were probably industrial accidents. Now, I'm not saying there aren't there aren't people in Djibouti who strike, or Somaliland who strike against these Chinese corporations or things like that. That occasionally happens. But the United States, my God, they've killed millions of people. 2 Iraq wars. They destabilized Syria. They turned Libya into an anarchist paradise. Civil war in Sudan. I don't tell you, I could go on. Millions and millions of people have died. So the difference is stark, and that's the one thing I wanted to say. Now, to get back on course, I've got Billy Bob's own words here, and let me just read a few of them, and he can riff off of these. In this conversation he had on the chat list the other day, where he was being very reasonable, and there were a couple of just absolute fools countering him, which I then said, this is enough. I'm going to engage them at their level and get Billy Bob off the hook. But anyway, Billy Bob said, but in the proletarian dictatorship of China, political control is not in the hands of the capitalist class. Political hegemony is maintained by the Communist Party of China. The unprecedented efficiency which the CPC has furthered the tangible material interests of the vast majority is the antithesis of capital dictatorship, which has no interest whatsoever in furthering working class interests. That says it all. And would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, that gets us, to the bigger picture of class struggle, basically. So Marx identified class struggle. He identified why, he identified what's going on and why, basically, and he got to the bottom of the forces within human society that result in why things are as they are. So under the capitalist mode of production, you have oppositional interests. The owners of the means of production have different interests, political and economic, than the workers, that work in those factories. So that is the basis for the leftist outlook is the class struggle. You have the ownership class that wants to control the government and run it in their interest, and you have the working class that also ought to want to control government and work it and utilize it for the interests of all people, not just the capitalist class like the capitalists do. And that's what communism is. That's what Mao is about. So Mao overthrew the capitalist class. He instituted a proletarian dictatorship. It's not going to be full communist. It's not going to be full socialist. You can't. Like we're in the midst of a centuries long class struggle. And you're just not going to have one country that can be a perfect socialist utopia, especially considering all the powers that are, going to try and keep that from happening. So the best we can hope for at this point in time that, we still have imperialism, we still have capitalist hegemony over the globe. They're very powerful economically, politically, militarily. The best you can hope for is to have different proletarian dictatorships come to power in certain countries. And hopefully that's going to spread and continue to develop. And we can see it happening. I mean, I'm very optimistic. The future is we're heading in the right direction. But, I think it's misguided to look at the proletarian dictatorship in China, in Cuba, and say that, we should not support those countries. China's an imperialist country just like the U.S. That seems so ridiculous to me. I don't understand how anybody who's identified as leftist can have that point of view for the reasons Carlo just brought up. But so I just contrast. It's very simple to share this message. I contrast proletarian dictatorship, a government of, by, and for the people, versus a capitalist dictatorship like we have in the West and Europe, where it's definitely run by the capitalist class. You're not going to change that. You're not going to change that dynamic utilizing their system. You can't vote hard and vote the Democrats and get the capitalists out of power, because the capitalists own both political parties. They own the media. They own the intelligence community. They own the Pentagon, the CIA. So, it's easy for me just to contrast. So, you have what what we can have now, the best we can hope for, is a proletarian dictatorship. And we have a few of those. And we contrast that with the capitalist dictatorships that we have in the West, including the US and Europe and Australia. So that's a basic, easy to understand framework, which I think is entirely applicable to our situation. Any thoughts or
well, we're going to take a brief break, and then we'll come right back with some more questions and some more thought-provoking commentary. Let's take a brief break here with a foreign policy review. Hi, I am Dustin Pickering from Parrot Literary Corner. You know me, your noble and honest host, and I've got exciting news for you. Last anthology, Series 1, The Literary Parrot, did such a great job. We wanted to continue to provide this community service to our viewers and to our contributors to the program. So please get up and get a copy immediately. If you're in this book, you want to get a copy. If you're not in the book, you want to get a copy and see what we're doing. You want to be excited with us. We want you on this program, and we hope to see you sometime soon on The Literary Parrot. You have to get your hands on this copy. It's amazing. It's an absolutely beautiful anthology meant just for you. Our past guests have been invited back to contribute yet again to this Series 2. We do this quarterly anthology. We will be doing this after our 200 episode milestone. As of this last quarter, we reached 200 episodes, and past that, get up and get a copy immediately. This is the only TV show on earth for creative writers, and our guests are amazing. They're also community activists building from the ground up. This program is for everybody out there who is a creative mind. Order several copies if you can, and donate to local libraries. Give them to your friends, cousins, fans, supporters, anybody that you think loves poetry. And it's not just poetry in this book. Remember, this is creative mind. So we have prose, fiction, short stories, essays, artwork, anything you can think of, artistically creative, photographs. Everything in this book is packed. It is packed. It is just absolutely packed. If you want to get your hands on it now, welcome back to the Foreign Policy Review of Parrot TV. I'm Dustin Pickering. Today we have Billy Bob as a guest on the program and Carlo Parcelli as our co-host as usual. And we're discussing the differences between Chinese and capitalist societies and governments. There are various small, differences and big differences between the capitalist mode and the socialist as well as the communist mode. And as Billy Bob was saying, that we don't really have a full-scale communist mode out there to base our judgments on, but we do have a theory, I guess. So I want to ask a billion-dollar question here. Now, we talk a lot about wealth inequality. Why is this an important issue for us? Why is this something we should be considering and concerned with as a society? I'll ask Billy Bob first.
Wealth is power. The more unequal a society is, the more disenfranchised the vast majority are going to be. So, wealth inequality is really a measure of political power to a great extent. The U.S., of course, is, I think, the worst as far as wealth inequality goes. China is not that bad. China's way better as far as wealth inequality than the U.S. There's another metric called income inequality, and in income inequality, China is one of the worst countries as far as income goes. I think that's a lot less of a meaningful metric than wealth inequality, and there's reasons for that in China. But you will see a lot of anti-China, people bringing out income inequality and saying, "Oh, look, they're just as bad as the U.S. or even worse." But if you look at wealth inequality, they're not nearly as bad. And the bottom line is, like Carlo was saying, the Chinese Communist Party is not owned by capital. They do not take the interests of capital. They're not creating policies based on the interests of capital. So that's what the West does. China, looks at the totality. They look at what's in everybody's best interest, the interest of the vast majority, and that's how they decide policy. And they've really done a great job at it. Unprecedented job. But yeah, wealth inequality is a problem, and it's a natural result of development. It's a natural result of harnessing the capitalist mode of production. It's inescapable. You're going to have inequality when you utilize the capitalist mode of production. But I would say that in China's case, it was still necessary to do that because you're talking about the difference between the egalitarian distribution of scarcity on the one hand and a skyrocketing of productive forces and just material goods, raising everybody's quality of life in a way that wouldn't have been possible without harnessing Western foreign investment and Western markets. But again, you're right. Along with that comes certain inequality, and that's it. China's not perfect. They got a lot of inequality. In fact, though, they did like in 2013, they identified it publicly, and they've been taking a lot of steps to curb inequality and to roll it back. So, and that's the difference between China and the U.S. One of the major differences. The U.S. celebrates inequality, doesn't think there's a problem with it at all. Of course, there's not for the capitalist class. And then China sees it as a, and they're taking steps to deal with it. But it's inescapable. If you're going to harness the capitalist mode of production, inequality is going to result.
So, Carlo, what are your thoughts on Billy Bob's comments?
Well, I agree with them essentially. I have no argument at all with them. We can't. I don't want to go into the human psyche about notions of celebrity and all, and how easily even the Chinese people have a general population has fallen into these notions of celebrity. But I think what Billy Bob said about wage distribution is accurate, because in Beijing, Beijing or Singapore, an apartment would cost a 2-bedroom apartment would be a couple of $1 million. It wouldn't be New York prices or even DC prices where I am, but it would be high. But you also have to take into account that there's an enormous number of mid-sized cities in China, and that the Chinese government has backed this huge housing situation. But many of the apartments are vacant because the people in those areas really still can't afford them. I would much rather have the Chinese government addressing that problem than I would Wall Street. Let me just put it that way. Another comment I wanted to make just briefly is that and Billy Bob touched on this, and we can elaborate on a little bit. Is people go to you, oh, those authoritarian Nicaraguans, oh, they got to crack down. Well, if you had, and I'm going to start using my usual language here. I know Billy Bob has a couple of kids, and he might want them to watch this. But if you had Uncle Slimy standing on your neck 24/7, using every power at his disposal, with people as evil as Elliot Abrams or Bolton or Pompeo, just animals, not human beings, but just psychopathic animals on your neck 24/7, trying to devise ways to kill you, to literally kill you. I think you might want to develop some system of security so that doesn't occur. That leads to, first of all, it leads to what appears to be in the United States authoritarian behavior, even though the United States has the NSA and 13 intelligence organizations standing over its shoulder every moment of every day. And the other thing it does, it hampers the development of the socialist projects in these countries. So that's something that has to be taken into account too. And it's like, and I'm sure Billy Bob has experienced this, it's like beating your head against a wall to convince people that this is a consideration. They'll deny. I've had people deny there's an embargo against Cuba. My God, I've been personally witnessing it for 60 some years now. It's just crazy. So and then we could go into the ignorance of the American people, but that's for like a 47-part series, each episode being 27 hours long. That the ignorance of the American, population. But anyway, I just wanted to add that to the mix.
Well, and another question I have for you guys is I've heard this phrase, the corporatization of government, used in sort of a Marxist framework, and how I think in the progressive era in the United States there were certain reforms made to our system, the more centralized banking and things of this nature that were meant for kind of strengthening the political power in opposition or within cooperation with the private sector. So what do you guys think of that phrase, the bureaucracy being a sort of corporatization of government? I'll go with Carlo first.
But the corporatization, bureaucracy being the corporatization of government,
right? Is that true?
Living in the city of bureaucracy, mm-hmm. I don't know if I really thought of it that way.
I've heard that phrase in Marx in his literature, and sort of that kind of framework of thought. That the private markets and public markets sort of follow a similar logic, but mostly in a capitalist country, the government will be when it becomes more bureaucratic, it's actually more like corporatization of government.
No, I think I look at it more like private markets are always putting it over on public mm-hmm. markets. How do you get a $900 hammer? I mean,
right.
Or how do you convince people to take a Marine or a guy, a special forces guy who's basically costing the U.S. government $349 a day or whatever it is, and convince them to go with one of Blackwater's Mercs. I don't know what they're called now or whatever. Eric Prince's Mercs that cost $1,600 a day, and say that's a better use of taxpayers' funds. How do you do that? Well, you got corruption on both ends. Mm-hmm. That's why this if we want to talk about domestic politics, there's essentially no difference between the Democrats and the Republicans. I mean, the Democrats are coming up with all these proposals, but at this infrastructure proposal of Biden's. But when you think about it, and Manchin's supposed to be the wrench in the system, when you think about it, that might be a setup because they didn't give us health care.
Right.
They didn't boost education, though there was some of that in the bill. It almost seems like is that they're just basically now in cahoots with wealthy people, and I think with some exceptions throughout our history, Teddy Roosevelt to a certain degree, that sort of thing, that's been the name of the game,
right?
I mean, it has consequences. I mean, it's beautifully structured in a certain sense. You have kids in poor neighborhoods, and what choices, or from rural areas, what choices do they have but to go into the military because there are no other jobs? Well, that's by design. So what do? You figure out, well, we got all this cheap labor over there, and wherever, in Thailand or Cambodia or Sri Lanka, India, 100,000 other places. Let's move that labor over there. That'll impoverish these kids, and then we give them nothing for their education, mm-hmm. and we got them suckered in. We got them suckered into the military, and I have nieces and nephews that are in that position, mm-hmm. and there's no talking to them. They're Trump fans, so fuck that. Mm-hmm. So it's a game well played by these people, by the wealthy people. It's very sinister, and it's not hard to imagine how they would say wipe out all 6.5 million people living in Nicaragua if it meant that they would find an extra dime laying around after they did the murders. I'm not, and I don't feel like I'm exaggerating. These people, I live among them.
Yeah.
They're evil people. I used to have a store in Upper Northwest, a bookstore in Upper Northwest Washington D.C., where they live, and I have some stories to tell. These are evil people.
I mean, we can just see what they did in Syria. You know, what they did. Libya was the most prosperous country in all of the African continent. By every metric, the people of Libya were better off than anybody else, and they just totally destroyed that country. And they did it in Syria. You know, Syria was a prosperous country. And why? Why are they killing all these millions of people, causing all this destruction? Because they calculate that it's in their political and economic interest. So, but you know, what is the motivation? It's the class rule. So they are Marxists, right? The capitalist class that runs the government. They look at things through a lens of class struggle and oppositional class interests. They realize that the working class of the world share interests that are not their own, and so they're trying to maintain this hegemony, this capitalist class rule. But they think in very class-based terms. That's what their motivation is. So there's a reason that they're destroying all these socialist governments that are trying to do good by their people. It's a bad example for them, and if they don't destroy it, it'll just end up taking power away from them, globally speaking, and they don't want that. So they resist it by killing people, and then they're happy to do it, like you said. You brought up bureaucracy, and I don't really think that government bureaucracy is something that we can get away from. Like, I think the reality and the constraints of government are going to necessitate a bureaucracy of sorts. The question is, what class is going to run that bureaucracy, and in the interest of who? So we have a bureaucracy in the West owned and run by the capitalist class in the interest of the capitalist class. I think we should all advocate for a bureaucracy, because I don't think there's any option to bureaucracy run by of and for the working class and in the interest of the working class. That doesn't mean we're going to eliminate private ownership right now. It doesn't.
Right. We lost network.
It just means,
here he goes. He's back. Oh,
yeah.
Okay, can you repeat that just real quick, because we lost you for a second there?
Sure. Next time, I'm going to definitely not use the Wi-Fi, so it's my bad for that. That's a rookie mistake.
All right.
So I advocate definitely for the government, the bureaucracy, the state apparatus to be run in the interest of workers in the vast majority, and as opposed to how it is being run now. And there's all kinds of different narratives that are disseminated and that are tolerated and perpetuated really by the capitalist class in the West. And they will proliferate any number of explanations or narratives about why things are as they are and what's going on, as long as they don't really threaten their interests, right? So you have liberalism, you have conservatism, you have libertarianism, you have right-wing fascism to a certain extent. These are all tolerated and proliferated, but what's not allowed is a Marxist-Leninist viewpoint like my own. You don't see this in on the platforms of mass communication, because it is threatening to their interests. So the ways that they maintain their power is to just confuse and deceive the vast majority of us into thinking all these different things in different lines, and making people having to work so hard that they have no time to even think about these things. And that's one of the ways that they are able to maintain their control. So what can we going forward, like how do we overcome what they're doing? How do we overcome their stranglehold on the media? How do we overcome their control of the government apparatus? I mean, it's an open question. Again, I'm optimistic. I think what China is doing by displacing imperialist global hegemony, they definitely are offering. They're turning unipolarism into multipolarism. They're going to give countries like Nicaragua the opportunity to not have to just depend on the U.S., but they're to have China that they can trade with and work with and help develop with. Because if it was just the U.S. unipolarism, the U.S. would not trade with them. They would give them the Cuba treatment, give them the DPRK treatment, and so it's a great thing what China's doing. But I'm getting back to China. That wasn't even the topic of discussion.
Right. I have an interesting question. Like, can we use the tools provided by capitalism to subvert the capitalist class? Like, we have the internet, for instance, it's sort of a tool of capitalism. I mean, right now we're using the internet to sort of proliferate ideas that are opposition to the capitalist hegemony. So how do you guys feel about that? I mean, do you ever question yourself, like, am I a hypocrite, or is it more like anything goes, kind of in the class struggle? What are your thoughts, Billy Bob?
No, I'm all for.
I believe. Go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you for the question. I'm all for harnessing technology. Utilizing it in the first.
We have some network issues going on. What's that? We'll go ahead and go with Carlo. What do you think of that? Using the tools.
He's back.
Okay, he's back. Yeah. Okay. Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
My Wi-Fi, I'm sure.
Yeah, probably.
So I'm a proponent of harnessing, technology to get to try and share truth with people and get them to understand the.
Lost him again. Very okay.
So go ahead, Carlo. Maybe after you're done, my Wi-Fi will get better.
Well, I'm a Luddite.
Okay,
I think we should smash the internet.
Oh wow.
No, I'm only half kidding.
Just retreat, like hermitage.
I mean, Julian Assange had a tremendously profound effect on the public discourse, and of course they're going to kill him. They're going to murder him in plain sight. It's now just obvious. The other thing, and I don't know if either of you, I mean, some of the things I watch and pay attention to are the gray zone. I don't know if you're familiar with the journalists there, but they often do Izzy Stone quality journalism. They do great journalism. But Max Blumenthal is linked up with Jimmy Dore, who was kind of a populist at the beginning, and I kind of admired what he was doing because he gathered a huge following around universal medical care and improving education infrastructure and all of that. But now he's like this anti-COVID guy, and his listenership has completely flipped to this kind of QAnon people following him now, and it's actually grown. And he's lost a lot of his old people like myself. Now I'm kind of lukewarm about dealing with him, and it's all because he followed the logic of the left, and that is that every time that the government is bad. Now you have people like Steve Bannon who have adopted that principle that everything the government is bad from a right perspective. They're just taking the left perspective and flipped it. Now, what's the big difference, and what's allowed them to do that? The fucking media. This media, the one we're on, has allowed the narrative to get flipped into a place where there is a real potential, not just in Ukraine for a fascist overthrow of government, but in the United States for a fascist overthrow. Now, I'm of two minds of that. I go, one part of me goes, that would be terrible. I'd hate to see that. The other part says Americans deserve it. They deserve it. They deserve to just come apart at the seams and have a total meltdown and let the Russians and the Chinese step in and help everybody in the world. And that's as close to a utopia as we're going to get, because that's how much I personally hate America, and everything I've seen it do since the Gulf of Tonkin on. So it's like that's the way I generally see. So in a way, I would want to promote the media, but on the other hand, I can see the evil it's producing. It's taken a genuinely humane comedian like Jimmy Dore and turned him into a homicidal killer, a kind of anti-vaxxer who claims he's not an anti-vaxxer. But everybody who follows him are anti-vaxxers, QAnon supporters, anti-immigrant, anti-Semite, anti-black. That's his new following. So he took this one issue and he flipped his whole spiel. So, and that's only possible when you can reach millions of people like this. I mean, I don't want to go too long in this, but when we did the TV show, the local community TV show we did back in the 1980s, you had to do the show, take the tape to the community access channel, and then if you wanted it to show in other counties, you had to walk or give a tape to somebody that lived in that county. It was very labor intensive, and we did it for 3 years. It went completely broke, and but it was really hard to do. And I don't know how many people we missed. Maybe a few reached maybe a few thousand, but now it's a breeze. We come in, we do this every week, and some people do this every week, and they reach millions of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you got this base ignorance. It's very dangerous, very dangerous.
And with that said, we would like to close the program today. Thank you so much, Billy Bob, for talking with us, and Carlo again for being co-host with me. This has been the Foreign Policy Review. I am Dustin Pickering, and you're watching Parrot TV. You guys go out there, do some reading, research, and think about things a little outside the box there. And just keep watching Parrot TV. Have an excellent afternoon. Thank you for watching. Subscribe.
Keep watching The Politics every Friday, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on